Leanne asked me if I would introduce her tonight, and she really doesn't need any introduction because pretty much everybody in Bailey's Harbor knows Leanne Brann Despodes. But I've had the pleasure of seeing some of this program tonight, and I just wanted to say you're in for a real treat. She's just done an outstanding job. She's really become our Bailey's Harbor historian, and we who love history really appreciate having somebody who has really gotten their teeth into the history of Bailey's Harbor. And because Brands are one of the oldest families in this town, and we're quite an illustrious family, this is a real interesting history to share with us. So, Leanne, I want to thank you for all the work and time, and I have to say, she did this when she was sick. So we doubly appreciate all that you did to put this program together. So thank you, and let's get on with this wonderful program. I know you're really going to enjoy it.
Okay, can you figure out how to turn all these lights out?
Sure.
Well, those are really kind words from one of my best friends, so I guess she's kind of obligated. Okay, that's good. I'm just calling this the Jacob Brann family in early Bailey's Harbor because I don't really go too much further than my great-grandfather, Jacob Brann, and his children and their families in the early days of the town. There they are up there. Jacob, in this picture, clean-shaven. I think he looks better. And I have to apologize for the picture of Anna Maria, his wife. I left Chicago. I have a portrait of her in my foyer in my condo. And I forgot to take a picture of it. So my neighbor took a picture through glass and emailed it to me, and that's just, so she looks like a ghostly figure. But if you look at the two daughters beneath her, there's a tremendous resemblance. The high, kind of elegant cheekbones, and I don't know, she just has a very firm-looking face. And what you probably can't tell here also is that she had her portrait done wearing like a babushka, which struck me as being very strange because they did portraits of Jacob, August, and Will, and she. And I said to my mom, I don't get that. Like, why would you have your portrait done and be wearing a scarf? And it turns out it was because she had a goiter and wanted to cover it up. And as many of you who are residents of this area for a long time know, this area of the United States used to be called the goiter belt. And as children, we had prophylactic pills in school to prevent that. But when iodized salt came on the market, that problem kind of went away. Beneath them are the two big seafaring men, John and Andrew, the two sisters, Hannah and Mary, who look so much alike, you can hardly, like when you look at their photographs of their families, you can, is this the same family or is it a different family? It's hard to tell. And then the two youngest brothers, August, that would be my grandfather, and Will, his brother who never married. This story all started in Jakobstad, Finland, a shipbuilding city on the Gulf of Bothnia. The Brands were Swedish Finns, which meant, as far as I can figure, that they may have at some time originated in Sweden, but because Finland was part of the Swedish Empire for hundreds of years, Swedish was the language of commerce in Finland and was particularly spoken along the coast. The introduction of the potato in 18th century Finland was a boon to that land that had a very short growing season. It helped provide food security, which caused quite a growth in population. But in the mid-19th century, around 1860, due to difficult weather, staple root vegetables and crops rotted in the wet ground before they could be harvested. And that brought on the last great European famine, which was centered in Scandinavia. It was bad in 1862. People were wandering the countryside begging. Even bread was made using the lichen they scraped from trees. The situation was dire and lasted for years. At that time, Finland was a Grand Duchy of Russia, and Russia provided little or no support for them. And these are the circumstances that set the scene for mass immigration from Finland. Jacob Brann's family was part of this wave of immigration. The children came one by one, and they eventually brought Jacob and Anna to America. Jacob had a farm. This is the farm. This picture was given to my mother by John and Claire Brann, who traveled to Finland to meet the Finnish relatives in the 80s. Jacob had this farm, but he was also a seafaring man. And the family often suffered during long absences, according to my mother, his granddaughter. Her father was born in 1860, so most of his childhood occurred during this famine. He told of not always having enough to eat, but that his mother sometimes worked for a caterer, and when she could bring home leftovers for the children, then they feasted. The older boys, John and Andrew, went to sea, and this became part of the overall story. August and Will were the two youngest and grew up to be businessmen who owned commercial vessels, but they did not become sailors. The four Brann brothers arrived in America one by one from 1872 to 1880. Andrew arrived in 1872 at the age of 21. He was already a seasoned sailor, having begun his first voyage at the age of 17. Sue Walls, his great-granddaughter, shared a document, this is a picture of part of it, describing his first voyage, which lasted 3 years and took him to the British Isles, Italy, Java, Australia, New Zealand, Haiti. He went around Cape Horn and finally to San Francisco. He loved to explain how he first came to the West by sailing east. The return trip included stopping at the small islands off Peru to take on loads of bird guano. This was very much prized for making fertilizer in those times. They headed to Hamburg and then finally home to Jakobstad. His second journey included the crew being imprisoned, I think in Norway for a time, put on bread and water. But they were able to petition the king for a shorter sentence. He lists several times he ran away from his ship. This happened mostly in the United States, and ends his story in the fall of 1872 simply with, and I made a little box around it, my fabulous computer skills, right here. At the end it says, then in the fall, to Bee Harbor. He left no clue as to why Bailey's Harbor. We don't know why it was his destination. But some obituaries and so forth indicated that the brothers came here to cut wood. That was a way you could definitely make some money. The geography and climate, much remembered Jakobstad, Finland. There's Jakobstad. And I would guess that he felt pretty much at home. And when I looked at these pictures online, the upper right picture, could that be Tufts Point? I mean, I think. And the beach could easily be a beach along Door County. And even the aerial view of Jakobstad is not dissimilar to an aerial view, perhaps, of a town up here. Sue's father, John N. Brann, told me how he loved to listen to Grandpa Andrew tell stories of his travels. Andrew was followed next by John, the oldest brother. 2 years later by August, who was maybe 14 or 15, and last by Will, who arrived in 1880 at age 16. A couple of years later, they brought their parents, Jacob and Anna Maria. It's difficult to find out much about the two girls, Hannah and Mary. But Hannah and her husband, Alfred Olander, a boat builder and fisherman, immigrated in 1884. And I did just yesterday discover that Maria married her husband here in early 1885, but I'm not sure when she actually came, if she came with her parents or I don't know. It appears that the four Brann brothers and their father worked and farmed when they first arrived. In 1891, they erected a building just north of John Brann's house to be a furniture and general store. Now, this is their first ad. And it says, time and space will not permit particularizing. But if you're in need of anything in household furnishing or in the matter of hardware, it will be for your interest to give me a call before placing your order elsewhere. And then notice right under that, this becomes important in the story too, undertaking a specialty. Now, we never got or heard any details except that they prepared bodies for burial and they provided caskets. Funeral parlors, as we know them, weren't a thing then. People just were laid out in their own homes in their parlor. I kind of wonder if maybe Anna Maria was the specialist in that and, was given assistance maybe by her sons and husband, I don't know. But it seems something more like women were called upon to do. This ad shows John Brann, moving on. This little shot is, on the left is the old store, which is the Cornerstone currently now, across the street from us. In the background is the Blacksmith Inn. That little white building in the middle burned down quite a few years ago, was called the Cape Cod Inn. And on the right is the new Brann Brothers store. That would be the location of the Nelson Shopping Center that was across the street from here. And then this is the picture of the new store. It was built in 1901. It was 40 by 100 feet dimension. It was built from 8-inch long cedar blocks laid in a bed of mortar. Its closeness to the pier would be convenient for their business. The old store was used for storage, especially for storing caskets. We have a ledger of charge accounts from 1886 to 1889 that shows in detail what could be purchased at the store, providing you have the eyes and the patience to decipher. Because, we're working with people here who are speaking a few languages, some more schooled than others in penmanship, and the names of things were like a little different sometimes from what we're used to, but still very interesting. And it shows in detail what could be purchased at the store, and also that many patrons traded cords of wood and farm products to pay for their store goods. So this particular page was for J.W. Kinsel. He was the school teacher at that time in town. And if you were at our school reunion program last month, you might remember that he also was a cheesemaker because school teaching didn't pay enough to support his family. And so here, on this side, it lists things he bought, like here's sugar for $1. I can read that one. And here, I think this is ribbon, 2 yards of ribbon for 24 cents. But over on this side, it tells how many pounds of cheese he's bringing to the store, which they will then ship on their vessels to the cities and so forth, and he'll receive a store credit for it. So then down here, store bill 3139, credit 5033, paid in full, and then he goes on, it goes on to the next transactions. And I just picked that page because it was not so jam-packed with writing as many of the other pages. But Mr. Kinsel plays a part in a rather dramatic story that comes later on, so I thought it deserved to have a little honor. In addition to the store, the brothers had a small fleet of schooners operating off the 1,100-foot-long Brann Pier that was originally the Kilgore Pier, which he let go to rack and ruin, was then purchased by someone named Chipman and Razor, and I think they found it to be too much to get in good shape, and they sold it in 1886 to the Brands, to Jacob and Anna Brann. The picture on the left, my best estimate is that it was taken maybe between 1910 and 1915. And on the right is an aerial shot, which is not the easiest thing to make out. But you see along here, this is the remnant of the Brann Pier. This is a breakwater we have. This would be like Nelson's here, just so you have an idea. And this does definitely show how long it was. But these piers in Lake Michigan, you could spend your life looking for articles in the historic newspapers of this pier broke out, that pier crashed, they're repairing this pier, that pier's falling to rack and ruin. It was a real risk to have a pier. It was a big moneymaker, but there was a constant rebuilding that had to go on. Navigation season usually closed in December each year until spring when the ice broke out. Commerce could again begin. So two of the Brann schooners were the Jenny Bell and the George W. Westcott. But the star of the show was the Nancy Dell. If you do a simple search for her in the Door County Historic newspapers, you get 118 hits. It's a boat. Some people only have like 3 hits. The Brann brothers took full ownership of her in 1896, and she plied her trade up and down the lake for 22 years until her dramatic loss in 1901. John Brann, the oldest brother, an experienced seaman, was made the official master of the ship at the time of purchase. Now, this ship is not the Nancy Dell, but Russell Lights, whose specialty is sunken ships, brought me the whole biography of the Nancy Dell. And there's a lot of description there, and it was described as a square-backed, plain front, 2-masted, and so forth. And when I found this postcard in my collection, I thought, I'll bet she looked pretty much like that. So just to give you an idea of what those boats were like, when they came in and out of the harbor. Well, he was the master at the time of purchase, and he left on the last trip of the season for Chicago with a load of farm products, cordwood, Christmas trees in December of 1901. Weather was a little questionable. After a time, they hit a blizzard in below-zero weather, and after 2.5 days, finally hit water near Gary, Indiana, that was shallow enough to drop an anchor, which had to be chopped free of huge amounts of ice before they could drop it. They took the yawl boat and called for help. Now, by this time, everybody in Bailey's Harbor just assumed they had been all lost, all hands lost that the ship went down. But Captain John kept his watch until his beard was frozen to his clothes, leaving only when he was sure the anchorage was secure. One of the heroic crew interviewed later said that they must have pumped the entire Lake Michigan through that boat before it came to anchor. The Nancy Dell and her cargo were essentially destroyed, so Will Brann, the young brother, went south and sold it lock, stock, and barrel for $600 at quite a huge loss. Captain John Brann turned out to be quite an interesting figure. All I had ever heard about him from my mother, and she had never really known him, was that he was a ship captain. Like, you know, there were the businessmen, and there was the ship captain, and so forth, and that he had a little problem with drinking. I think she said that maybe twice, and just like that, you know, just like, you know, we don't know if it was bad or not bad. In 1883, he traveled back to Jakobstad, Finland, and I suppose that was probably to tie up any business, you know, land sales, whatever, because everybody was now over in the United States. He was interviewed by the Advocate on his return from that trip, and he provided a great understanding of the hardships in Finland following the 7-year famine, and underscored how he loved the United States and the opportunities it provided for the poor and king-ridden individuals of the world. The next mention of any Brann in the local papers was a lengthy description of a court case that John and Andrew brought against a man who claimed a young bull that they had that had kind of gotten out of its pen and was running around town. And he claimed the bull was his, they claimed the bull was theirs. And it's fun to read the article in the paper because you can tell so much of it is tongue-in-cheek. And they're talking about, when do young bulls get wrinkles in their horns? When do their teeth fall out? You know, how big are they? And, well, the Branns won that case. And nobody ever saw any sign of this similar bull of Mr. Krauser's. So we'll never know the end of that story. That's followed at the end of 1885 by Captain John Brann getting married to Ellen Short at Andrew Brann's house, Christmas evening, 1885. Dancing past midnight, it was reported that all of the guests felt royally entertained. And from my reading in these old newspapers, that is the compliment, that you are a royal entertainer, or that you've been royally entertained. That means it was like the best party you ever went to. And John's comment to all that was that he only got married once in a while. His wife had been married before and brought several children to the marriage with her. And according to Emma Toft, in a book that Beverly Anklam wrote, she described Ellen's first marriage and described it as rather tumultuous. And I found just, I don't know, a week or so ago, a letter from some niece, I think maybe to my grandmother, commenting on the fact that Ellen was taking a fairly long vacation in town here, and kind of saying like, well, her daughter must be relieved, you know, like she's not there. Give her a break. In March of 1897, it was reported that Captain Brann, and this was another newspaper article, so this must have been a special thing, completed a miniature of a full-rigged barkentine ship for Captain Peter Olson at the life-saving station. And I've been trying to devise ways to find the family of this man, but finding the family of Peter Olson in Door County is like way too easy because you get so many. This boat that he made was 5 feet long and even included miniature people working on the boat. I suspect that this provided some extra money that was used to finance a trip to the Alaskan gold fields during the Klondike Gold Rush. His brother-in-law, Maria's husband, Henry Starr, had gone to the Klondike to seek a fortune and sent back a letter that was published in the Door County Democrat describing life in the gold fields. I just pulled this offline so you could see. I mean, these were the sorts of things that were published. You want to go to the Klondike, get yourself a manual for finding gold. It's just like, you know, I suppose finding gold for dummies it would be today. He spent over 3 years in Alaska from April of 1886 to July of 1889. When he returned, he brought some gold nuggets. He said that he had a few claims up there and would have to see how they turned out. That letter may have inspired John, who set out for Alaska in August of 1897. And it just makes so much sense that he made that complex carving, to try to get a leg up maybe on making his fortune. John, however, was back by March of the following year, and he promptly opened the Klondike Saloon in Bailey's Harbor. Having apparently decided the risk and hardships of owning a saloon in Bailey's Harbor were preferable to those found in prospecting Alaska. Captain Brann and his wife Ellen moved to Crystal Falls, Michigan sometime before 1907 and resided with Mr. and Mrs. L.G. Wilson, their daughter Alice. Both he and Ellen visited frequently. In August 1926, he fell down a stairway, lingered about a week, and passed away at age 77. His obituary mentioned that he too delighted in telling stories of old-time sailing days on the ocean and on the lake. Well, we can't leave John and Ellen Brann, however, without reporting on one of the most profound tragedies ever to beset this little town. In October of 1889, an epidemic of diphtheria struck many of the town's children. And I just included this. We hear diphtheria, but do we know what it is? This is a child with a swollen neck. Think of mumps, but then I think multiply it by something. The extended Brann family suffered mightily as diphtheria cut a swath through the youngest people in Bailey's Harbor. J.B. Rick was a town doctor at the time, and in responding to requests for information, he provided a summary of the epidemic for the Independent newspaper on November 29th. It's worth noting that he sent his own wife and children away as soon as he recognized the danger. The doctor suggested the infection may have come through someone who had attended a public entertainment somewhere. But I've often wondered, many of the families who were afflicted were involved in trade and commerce, and I just sort of wonder if maybe it came in on a boat. It made sense to me. When the bacteria that cause diphtheria get into and attach to the lining of the respiratory system, they cause weakness, sore throat, fever, swollen glands. Within 2 or 3 days, the dead tissue forms a thick gray coating that can build up in the throat or the nose. And this is called a pseudomembrane. And as it covers these tissues, it becomes harder and harder to swallow, harder and harder to breathe. And the poison may also go into your bloodstream, can affect your kidneys and your heart and nerves. Dr. Rick reported 33 cases throughout the town and countryside as of November 20th. Of these, 13 children succumbed. By November 27th, it was over for the most part. Although my friend Lynn, who introduced me, and I noted that she had a relative who died that following January. So sometimes the illness did linger for a while. This is the effect on the Brann families in Bailey's Harbor. John and Ellen Brann, all 7 children were sick, 4 died. Henry and Maria Brann Starr, 1 sick, 1 died. Andrew and Louisa Brann, 3 were sick, 2 died. And Alfred and Hannah Olander were very lucky. Only 2 were sick, and none of them succumbed to the disease. The younger Brann brothers, August and Will, had no children, so they weren't affected in that way. But the grandparents, Jacob and Anna, lived with them. And you might recall, undertaking was a specialty. I suspect it came to the 4 of them to prepare these 7 little ones for burial all within a month's time. and there might have been other children as well, made even more difficult by the fact that there were not enough children's caskets to be had. And school teacher, cheesemaker Mr. Kinsell, had to make a trip to Sturgeon Bay to seek more. Because funerals couldn't be held during the epidemic, a public memorial funeral was held in May 1990 for the children. All the businesses in town were closed that day. Exercises began at the school with ballads and recitations. Then they were led out to the cemetery by the town's cornet band, which Will and August belonged to. There was program of the day ended there with eulogies for the departed. It's difficult to imagine the impact of losing so many children in such a short time in such a small place. Louise Brann temporarily left Bailey's Harbor and traveled to Finland after losing her two littler children. This is a photo showing the line, or a line, of gravestones of these children that you can find at the cemetery now. These square kind of standing up granite stones, and there are more down here, but my camera couldn't do it, are for the Pfeiffer family. They lost many children. And here are Andrew Brann's two. And then this is the Andrew Brann Family memorial stone. But if you're a person who does cemeteries, I like them myself, you can look at the stones and you can see 1889, 1889, 1889, 1889, one right after the other. Andrew and John Brann, the two older brothers, were partners for years. Andrew farmed outside of town for about 20 years. Then at age 40, in August 1891, he went into the hardware business. Andrew Brann's hardware store, oh wait, I just made a boo-boo. This is the John Brann family. I forgot I put it in there. These are the remaining girls, and these girls were all children of Ellen and John. Anna, Alice, and Tori. The middle girl is the one that they went to live with eventually. And then here is Andrew. He decided to start being an entrepreneur in 1891. His hardware store was located at 8041 Highway 57, and of course that is where we find the Chives restaurant today. He did very well as a purveyor of hardware and was often featured or mentioned in one of the Door County newspapers in which he was a frequent advertiser. In 1927, the Door County Advocate told of an exact wooden reproduction of a tall rigged ship on display in the store. Interviewing Andrew revealed that this was a replica of the Navigator, which is the boat I told you about on his first voyage of 3 years. He did the whole boat while he was sailing because it passed the time when he didn't have things to do. In fact, he did it twice because it was almost finished, and then they hit some rough seas and everything kind of got smashed, and so he started all over to finish it again. But he claimed he didn't mind because it passed the time. And what I love, he loved to show this to his patrons. And I think you get the understanding that he was kind of proud of that, because his family picture, the most prominent thing in the picture is the Navigator. I loved it when I found that out, because I've looked at these old pictures, my whole life. And I knew that John was the captain, and I knew that Andrew had the hardware store, and I could never figure out why would Andrew have a model ship in his family picture, but, well, now we know. Louise Newman and Andrew met in Finland. She joined him in Bailey's Harbor once he was satisfied that they could have a successful life here. Andrew and Louise's surviving son, John, was eventually joined by two more brothers Andy and Paul Gustav. Louise took her place in the community as well. She was known for her work with Emmanuel Lutheran Church and was head of the Sunday school for several years. She was also a founding member of the Ladies Improvement Club, sometimes jokingly referred to as a cemetery club, due to their extensive first projects in improving the town cemetery. This club still exists today as the Bailey's Harbor Women's Club and continues to do good works for the benefit of the town, especially providing college scholarships for local children. Andrew and Louise's industry and good works seemed to come together in 1913, the year the Women's Club was founded. That spring, Andy Brann graduated from high school in Sturgeon Bay with his cousin Lester, the oldest son of August Brann. Andrew had the old hardware store torn down and a new 24 by 48-foot modern hardware replaced it that summer. I think the family lived in that building, but I know that there was a farm, so I'm not 100% on that. Andy and Lester were avid baseballers, and the team played the Brann Field adjacent to the Brann Brothers General Store, and that you will see again called the Brann Field just south of the Cornerstone. But Andrew and Louise were not to be spared more tragedy. Their son Andy was gassed while serving in World War I. It caused weakness in his lungs and made him vulnerable to TB. He died at an early age, leaving a wife and daughter, Betty Lou, who many of you may have known as Betsy Hendrickson. Andy was a very popular county agent in Oneida County, which is what he went to as his career following getting his degree at the University of Wisconsin. Another son, Paul Gustav, Sturgeon Bay, oops, you're supposed to be looking at them. Sturgeon Bay High School valedictorian, University of Wisconsin graduate, doing business on the East Coast for a large company, died unexpectedly too. He became ill, returned home, and his death is described in The Advocate as from typhoid fever. I talked to my doctor about what happens when you get typhoid fever, and he said it can be a wasting kind of disease, so that made sense. The story my mother always said was that he died of brain fever, which could mean a lot of things. I mean, I don't think it was very defined. Of their 5 children, only John W. Brann survived to old age, making his mark at the University of Wisconsin as a professor of horticulture and in Bailey's Harbor as a beloved local historian. This brings us to the other 2 Brann brothers. And don't they just look snappy compared to those old seafaring guys? I mean, I think they do. The bachelors, August and Will. They were younger, and it seems as close as 2 brothers could be. They took over the general store furniture store that John Brann had started in 1891, purchased the pier, and they also purchased interest in the schooners. From time to time, they served in town government as supervisors, constables, and so forth. As mentioned earlier, parents Jacob and Anna lived with them. Now, Anna was 65 years old in 1889 for that diphtheria epidemic. And somewhere in there, I don't know what year, a young girl, Lena Olson from Ellison Bay, was hired to help in the house. The arrangement was successful until spring of 1894, when Anna Maria began to fail. She passed away on June 11th. And here's Lena, a little bit older than when she started, but not a whole lot. Now, I think many of you, if you're part of our family and are here, have seen this photograph. It's a photo of a funeral procession. And for my whole life, I've been told that that was Jacob Brann's funeral procession. But then I started doing this little bit of research, and what do I learn? but Jacob Brann died in December. And I can't really see those leaf trees, in December. It didn't make sense. I suspect that this was Anna's procession. Her obituary made particular mention of the large number who followed the hearse to the cemetery. After Anna's death, it appears that Lena, still a teenage girl, had charge of the three-man Brann household. In October 1895, 18-year-old Lena and August Brann married, though there was an age difference of 16 years. I've never heard that this was anything other than a love match and a long and very happy marriage. But I'm sure that if the household was to remain intact, propriety dictated that a marriage had to occur. I mean, how do you have a young girl of 17 or 18 years old in a household with two bachelors and their father? I mean, it wasn't going to go on very long. And it seems to me that propriety was really onto something. Because August and Lena's first son, Lester, was born on March 15th, 1896, which was, not terribly long after October. 5 more children, 4 more boys and a girl, were born in the living quarters that were part of the Cornerstone store setup. The Brann Brothers Enterprises continued to be a success. And in September 1901, it was reported that a new store was nearing completion on the lake side of the highway. This included a hall on the 2nd story that was used for dances and gatherings of all kinds. One such gathering was the stockholder meeting, the first stockholder meeting of the Door County Telephone Company in April of 1905. Now, just because I have this, I thought I'd show it. This is a picture in the interior of the store. I think I'm pretty correct. It's right around 1915. That little boy is Gordon Brann, the youngest of August Brann's children, and the little girl's my mother, Lenora, sitting on the counter with Rex, the dog. And I show it mostly because you can kind of see how those stores were set up. Lots of shelves, lots of little boxes. I think you would go to the counter and say, I'll have this and this and this, and then somebody would go and, get it for you. Back to the telephone company. The Wisconsin Telephone Company was just unsatisfactory for Northern Door. They had no interest in stretching out up here. It was just too doggone hard, and there were too few people. But eventually, a plan was made to share equipment and long-distance service and so forth. And Roger Edoff was put in charge. He was a real town mover and shaker, later moved on to the county board and so forth, very significant guy. And by 1906, poles were being installed and wire was being strung. There were many difficulties to be overcome, not the least of which was erecting telephone poles in bedrock. But in 1915, the Railroad Commission established a switchboard in Bailey's Harbor that was installed in August and Will Brann's new home at 8104 Highway 57. The house is still there, and August and Lena's granddaughter Barb lives there with her husband, and they've done extensive remodeling. So you might have to look, like maybe twice to make sure, but the house is still there. And I always thought it was a great house. Bailey's Harbor became home to the Door County Telephone Company, which also served as a sometime answering service for residents, a fire alarm system, and even a way to find your mom when she wasn't answering. Due mostly to difficulties in keeping up with technology, it was sold to General Telephone in 1959. With the advent of direct dialing, we saw the end of an era. We lost that voice asking, "Number, please?" And August, one of the company founders, served as vice president of the Door County Telephone Company from its founding until his death in 1942. The August Brann boys were perpetual members of the Bailey's Harbor baseball team, along with Andrew's son, Andy. And we often see them pictured with the town team, as well as mentioned in the sports pages of the local papers as games are described play by play every week. Lester was often referred to as Little Brann, being a little shorter in stature, to distinguish him from the others. The games were played on Brann Field for many years, right in the middle of downtown. The town has designated that space right across the street and south of the town hall. This enthusiasm continued through the 1950s as August and Lena's youngest son, Gordon, known as Buster for many years, has been recognized as one of the best players in the history of Door County League. His son, Chuck Brann, was a Door County sheriff for many years. And here, you didn't read that. Okay. Here is the field, and it would have been like right where the kayak place is. It was right on the street. And in this picture over here, that's August Brann there. I'm pretty sure this is Harry Brann. I can usually spot him. The others aren't so easy to tell. But when you look over at the house, you see this big transformer thing? I believe that was for the phone. And when you look, if the picture were in your hand, you could look very closely and see this big cable going into the north front room of the house, and that was where the telephone office was. On May 3rd, 1928, tragedy strikes again. August, at age 68, lost the Brann brothers' store to a devastating fire with an estimated loss of $10,000. And according to my mom, she said they thought that scout tent stored on the top floor had been waterproofed with something combustible, and that the fire started through spontaneous combustion, like a hot day and all that sort of thing. The large number of villagers who helped fight the fire were only able to save some of the contents of the first floor. And ironically, which I'm sure you can see by this front page headline of the Advocate, this huge fire, devastating for Bailey's Harbor, certainly for the Branns, was just a sub-headline. Because that very same day, a 9-structure, $50,000 fire at Valmy was the really big news of the day. The Brann fire started a little later on, and they were fearing other buildings would get involved, so they sent for the Sturgeon Bay Fire Department. There wasn't one here at that time. And they came and they raced north once again. But by the time they got here, it was, there was nothing to be done. As I understand it, August thought that maybe he could start over going back to the old Cornerstone building and maybe starting the store again. And this is all my head saying this. I don't know if it's true. But I think this interior of August and Gordon Brann was after the fire, and I think this was when he was thinking of maybe, he could reestablish his store. It's kind of bare looking, I think you'll agree. And I have amused myself by reading with the magnifying glass of the labels, on things to see what was happening in 1928. But eventually, he just put his business aside. It was time to be done. He was almost 70 years old. I don't think I would start over. And this is one of my favorite family pictures. August and Lena Brann with their first 3 boys, Harry, August, and Lester. And I'm certain that Lester is on the right, because I always feel like I can recognize Harry on the left. He just had a little rounder face than most. And if you look at this, if you've ever tried to take a picture with children, just look at this picture. Well, Harry's got something in his hand, so, he seems to be pretty happy. But look at the death grip. I mean, can't you see it? Haven't you ever done that? I mean, you know, some of you have. And then here, little Gus, his jacket doesn't even show because I know somebody is clamping that jacket, to keep him where he belongs. And I just think it's a great picture. This is a picture of all of August's children when they're somewhat older. Gus, Gordon, Lester, my mom, Lenora, Harry, and Walter. And I'm guessing the year, because to me, my mom looks like she's about 10. So I'm saying it's 1917. But following is a very favorite picture of our family. In 1952, when Harry Brann's oldest daughter, Doris, was married, her reception was at Maxwell and Bray's. And everybody, of course, went to the wedding. And this is the only time that I know of, in ever, that all 6 of August Brann's children were photographed one more time. And here we have Gus, Gordon, Wally, Lenora, Harry Brann in the dinner jacket, and then Lester on the right. So I just think it's kind of a neat and unusual thing. August's brother and partner, Will, never married. He was the youngest in the family. I was told he was raised by or lived with a minister's family in Finland, mostly because the Branns just couldn't afford it. And he was born in 1864, right at the height of this famine. And apparently that minister also attended somewhat to his basic education, so it was a further benefit. Now you can see by the photos he was a dapper fellow, and I will tell you, you might note, that he is very often found in the company of a good-looking horse. In fact, Will's racehorses were often put to work pulling the hearse and buggies for the undertaking side of the business. Once, at least, there was a runaway, and one of them got spooked at Grover Williams' funeral. And August often joked that the guest of honor had probably never had such an exciting ride in his life. Horse and sulky racing was a common entertainment, and according to the papers, Will won some and lost some with Bell, Dan Patch, and Mucko Elect, which were taken to the state fair in 1914. Every fall, it was reported he went to the state fair, and he was often mentioned as judging at the county fair. So for many years, he was a judge of horses at both fairs. And in fact, Mucko, who you just saw, I think was considered to be a pretty fine horse, because after Will passed away, it was reported in the newspaper that August Riebel purchased him. And you just really don't see that many, like Dobbin purchased by so-and-so, it doesn't happen. So I think Mucko was probably pretty special. Well, because Will didn't have a family, I think he was the one that was often traveling on business. It was he who settled up the Nancy Dell disaster. He's often reported as traveling to Milwaukee, Chicago, and something on business, arranging shipping destinations. And he was also active in community affairs, serving as justice of the peace, constable, running for town chairman, serving as vice president of the commercial club, chairing its committee for the booth at the county fair. In 1898, Emma Toft's sister Lucy writes that their sister Mary has a fellow, and it was Will Brann. When the telephone came to Bailey's Harbor, he participated in organizing the phone company, and later became a lineman. He traveled all up and down northern Door County, establishing lines, fixing lines. You can only imagine, things that would happen that would have to be done. He was an attendant at Henry Gaddai's wedding, and apparently had a splendid time at a leap year party in Sturgeon Bay that he attended with a lady friend from Sevastopol. He was an active and eligible bachelor. But during the post-World War influenza epidemic, 55-year-old Will was stricken with the illness in November of 1919. It appeared he was on the road to recovery when a large carbuncle appeared on the side of his head. And the pain was so severe, they took him to the Echelon Hospital in Sturgeon Bay. It was theorized that because of his weakened condition from the flu, when sepsis started spreading through his body, his heart failed, and shockingly, he passed away overnight. And this was a man who a week before was absolutely fine. His sister, Mary Starr, also died of Spanish flu a little earlier that year in Racine in the spring. Though Will and August conducted all their business on a 50-50 partnership, they never had gotten around to formalizing any of it. And when it became a real possibility that Will could die, and die intestate, steps had to be taken. The day before his death, a warranty deed was completed, which I'm showing you here, that formalized the division of all August and Will's holdings, including real estate, the business, the house, Brann Brothers' debts, and provided that $25 be paid quarterly to oldest brother John Brann until his demise. Will was the youngest of the brothers, yet the first to die. He has been memorialized time and time again as William appears in the names of many of his nephews. Now for the girls. Maria Brann Starr was the first of her generation to die. She passed away in early 1919 of the Spanish flu, but it's hard to find out much about Mary. We do know she was the only sibling to leave Bailey's Harbor. Henry Starr seemed to have a wanderlust and was an enterprising businessman. He spent a time in Utah in 1890 working as a carpenter in a lead mine, trying to figure out if that would be a great place for them to go. Mary was in Bailey's Harbor with the children. In 1896, he left for 3 years, as I told you, to seek his fortune in the gold fields in the Klondike. Mary remained in Bailey's Harbor with the children. Eventually, he came back. They moved to Sister Bay, and then later settled in Racine, Wisconsin. I'm sure that while she was here with her children, she enjoyed the support of all of her siblings, and probably they saw to it that, everything was taken care of, but still. And this is just a little something I noticed. I think you can see it. On the left is Mary Starr, her 2 girls and their son. On the right is her sister, Hannah Olander, their 2 girls and their sons. The dresses are identical. I'm not even going to make a comment on the dresses. Let me just say they're not at the top of my fashion list. But, you just have to wonder. They're 2 sisters. Did they just get together and say, oh, let's make the girls these great gingham dresses with a rickrack, and then we can have our picture taken and all that. But, I've had these pictures for my entire life, and I think 2 months ago I noticed that. So, not so much for being observant, but I just thought it was kind of fun to point out. Now here we have the Olanders, Alfred and Hannah Brann Olander, with Mary, August, Alfred, and Alina. Hannah is like the most mysterious of all the children. I don't know anything about her. I know the names of her children. I know the names of her husband. I know she looked just like her sister, and they apparently had a little sewing club. And that she came over in 1884 with Alfred Olander, but I don't know much about her. I know he sailed for 18 years, spent some time in the Coast Guard, worked as a fisherman, and ended his work life as a painter, but I don't know anything about her. Even her obituary in 1932 mentions nothing about her. The only thing you find out is that she is a pioneer of Bailey's Harbor. And it lists, who came to the funeral and, things like that, but just nothing. Her son Alfred was in the Coast Guard in Racine, and Lena was known to a lot of If you're a local person my age in the room, you knew Lena Betcher. She was a wonderful woman. She lived in the family home, was a local school teacher for many years, way before my time, and lived her whole life in Bailey's Harbor. And some of you may be familiar with her son, Bill Betcher, who's a very well-known golfer in Door County and also a very generous citizen of the county. Well, we are, and oh, I shouldn't have done that. I can't see. So after all this, I thought I should say something like, why did I bother doing this? And I think, we're living now, we're in the 21st century. What makes people want to find out these things? And I kind of decided that it's two things. Like, you want to see, like, is my little talent, does that show up, like generations back? Does my love of tightrope walking, is that something that comes from my past? But I think it's also to understand our family culture. Like, why do you feel the way you do? Why do you think the way that you do? Why do you do the things that you do? I never had a sense of my great-grandmother, Anna Maria. I knew her name, and that's all I knew. Now I see her as an amazing woman, raising a large family in the face of famine, doing what you had to do so they would survive, coping with the loss of 7 grandchildren within a month, and perhaps even, preparing them for burial. My grandmother, Lena, had to go out to work as a young teenage girl. When I say young, I'm talking like 14 and 15. And manage a household of 5. I couldn't have done it. I meant not to be able to do it now, in fact. I also found out that she wasn't just the best baker, the best cook, the best seamstress, the best needle worker, and the best mother, as I have always been told, but that she had a human, vulnerable side too. And I appreciate knowing it. I think of great Aunt Mary Starr, willing to wait to see, will I be moving to Utah? Will I be moving to Alaska? Taking care of her children when her husband was absent. These are some tough women. And I think my mother was tough too. And I even sometimes have had to call upon my own inner resources in my own life. I found in just learning about these people, they were close-knit. They supported each other personally and in business. They saw to it that the oldest brother would not be impoverished in his old age. They were ambitious but honest businessmen. They were creative, brave, and adventurous. They valued education, sending many of their children to university, but they encouraged the entrepreneurs who chose not to go. They encountered disastrous and tragic setbacks in their lives, but they gathered themselves and they continued to move forward. This is a list of qualities and a culture that I embrace, and I hope I've been able to pass them on to my children. Thanks. Now, is there anything that I can answer for you? I know you're probably so sick of listening to my voice, but is there anything that I could answer? Yes. I was able to get some, often, from town here, but the most critical census record probably would have been the 1890 census, and the 1890 census was burned and lost. So, they were just barely here by 1880, and then after that, other records kind of came to light. And I just need to ask, because this was a real big surprise for me, well, partly a surprise, but partly not. There are descendants of Jacob Brann in the room today other than myself, so I was wondering if all of you would be kind enough to stand up and show yourselves. Come, let's stand up. We're all cousins. Most of our cousins don't live near here. So it's Bill surprised me. Chuck came from Sturgeon Bay. Sarah has a home in Bailey's Harbor, and Sue and her husband Dennis also come to Bailey's Harbor. So it was just great that we were able to generate some Brann cousins to be able to come and join us. I really appreciate it. And Barbara, wait a minute, where are you? Did she leave? Oh, you're right there. All right. You can't escape.
Maybe the end of it all, they could come up and get their picture taken.
Well, maybe we
you know,
could just get our
afterward.
picture
That'd be
taken.
really
That would be nice.
You know,
Yeah, would you do that, Laddie? Can you do that? Or who does that?
whoever's got a camera, a phone, right here. Nancy
Oh, Nancy will do
Nancy
it.
or
She's
Paul will
excellent.
do it. She will do it. She'll take
Okay.
a picture afterwards.
Well, I guess it's almost time to release you. I have to thank two people, Russell Lights, the shipwreck guy, and I have to thank someone I've never met, Laura Kiakin of the Door County Library, who managed to put all the historic newspapers online. And that is how I found the great stories that I hope you enjoyed. That just, scouring those newspapers, it's amazing. You feel like you're living in those days almost. But she deserves definitely it.